In the summer of 1944, the Soviet Union launched the most devastating military offensive in human history. In just 10 days, they destroyed an entire German army group, 200,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. Hitler called it impossible. His generals called it a catastrophe. History calls it Operation Bagration, the operation that broke the back of Nazi Germany forever and sealed the fate of the Third Reich. By June 1944, Army Group Center held a massive bulge stretching deep into Soviet territory. Hitler had declared 4 cities, Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, and Bobryansk, as fortresses. No retreat, no surrender. German commanders knew the position was dangerous. Soviet forces had been massing for months, but Hitler refused to listen. He was convinced the main Soviet attack would come in the south. He was fatally wrong. Behind Soviet lines, the largest military buildup in history was underway. 2.5 million soldiers, over 5,000 tanks, 7,000 aircraft. The Soviets used every trick of deception, moving troops only at night, hiding vehicles under forest cover, using fake radio signals to mislead German intelligence. Army Group Center had no idea what was coming. When the blow fell, it would be total and overwhelming. On June 23, 1944, exactly 3 years after Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the Red Army attacked. 4 Soviet fronts struck simultaneously across a front of 1,000 kilometers. Thousands of artillery guns opened fire at once. The noise was heard 200 kilometers away. German frontline troops, outnumbered 10-1, were simply overwhelmed. Within hours, the front had collapsed in dozens of places. The German nightmare had begun. Soviet air power played a decisive role from the first hour. Over 7,000 aircraft flew continuous missions, destroying German supply lines, artillery positions, and troop concentrations. Without air cover, German infantry were exposed and helpless on open roads. The Luftwaffe could not respond. It had been bled dry on other fronts. German soldiers looked to the sky and saw only red stars. For the first time on the Eastern Front, the Soviets controlled the air completely. Vitebsk was the first fortress city to fall. Soviet forces drove around the city from north and south, closing the encirclement on June 25th. 50,000 German soldiers were trapped inside. Hitler ordered them to hold to the last man. For 3 days they fought desperately to break out, but the ring held. On June 27th, the surviving garrison surrendered. The commander was captured. Hitler's fortress had fallen in just 4 days. South of Vitebsk, the story was equally catastrophic. Soviet armored columns raced around Bobryansk with terrifying speed, encircling over 70,000 German soldiers. Trapped in dense forests and swamps, the Germans attempted desperate breakout attacks. Soviet bombers and artillery hammered the pocket around the clock. The roads inside were choked with burning vehicles and dead horses. Those who survived the initial encirclement faced a choice: surrender or die. Within 1 week, Army Group Center had virtually ceased to exist as a fighting force. Entire divisions had been annihilated. Supply depots, artillery parks, and headquarters were overrun or destroyed. German soldiers who escaped the initial encirclements retreated westward in chaos, without food, without ammunition, without orders. The roads of Belarusia were littered with abandoned vehicles, dead horses, and discarded equipment. It was not a retreat, it was a rout. The Soviet advance was relentless. On July 3rd, just 10 days after the offensive began, Soviet tanks entered Minsk, the capital of Belarusia. East of the city, over 100,000 German soldiers were trapped in a massive pocket. The fall of Minsk was a catastrophe of the first order. Hitler sacked 3 army commanders in a single day. General Ernst Busch, commander of Army Group Center, was dismissed in disgrace. The city that Germany had held for 3 years fell in hours. East of Minsk, the remnants of Army Group Center fought desperately to escape. Soviet forces tightened the ring with ruthless efficiency. Artillery and bombers struck continuously. German commanders tried to organize breakout attempts, but with no fuel, no ammunition, and no air support, they failed. Soldiers threw away their weapons and tried to escape through the forests on foot. Most were hunted down by Soviet cavalry and partisan units. The Minsk pocket was liquidated by July 11th. Thousands upon thousands of German soldiers surrendered, officers, NCOs, entire units laying down their weapons in mass capitulations. Many were starving, exhausted, and without ammunition. For the Wehrmacht, mass surrender on this scale was something entirely new and deeply humiliating. Generals who had led divisions and corps now stood in Soviet captivity. Army Group Center was not retreating, it was disintegrating. The proud force that had driven to the gates of Moscow in 1941 was finished. On July 17, 1944, 57,000 German prisoners of war were marched through the streets of Moscow in a deliberate act of public humiliation. Generals walked at the head of the column. Behind them came tens of thousands of soldiers, dirty, defeated, and broken. The streets of Moscow were lined with silent Soviet citizens. When the prisoners had passed, street-cleaning vehicles followed, washing away the shame of the German army from the streets of the Soviet capital forever. The operation was commanded by 4 of the Soviet Union's finest military minds: Zhukov, Vasilevsky, Rokossovsky, and Bagration. Each commanded a massive front with hundreds of thousands of men. The planning was meticulous and took months. Rokossovsky famously argued with Stalin over tactics, and Stalin backed down. These men had learned from the disasters of 1941 and 1942. Now they were masters of modern warfare, and Army Group Center paid the ultimate price for underestimating them. Hitler's rigid no-retreat orders trapped dozens of divisions in hopeless positions. Commanders who requested permission to withdraw were refused or sacked. By the time Hitler authorized retreats, it was already too late. The Wehrmacht's greatest strength had always been the initiative of its commanders. Now that initiative had been strangled by the Führer himself. The army that had conquered half of Europe was now dying by Hitler's own orders. For the people of Belarusia, Operation Bagration meant liberation after 3 years of brutal German occupation. During the occupation, over 2 million Belarusian civilians had been killed, 1/4 of the entire population. Villagers had been burned, entire communities murdered. When Soviet soldiers entered freed towns and villagers, civilians emerged from hiding, weeping, embracing the soldiers, unable to believe the nightmare was finally over. Soviet partisans played a vital role in the success of Operation Bagration. In the weeks before the offensive, partisan units carried out the largest coordinated sabotage operation of the war, destroying thousands of rail lines across Belarusia in a single night. German supply trains could not move, reinforcements could not reach the front. When the Soviet offensive began, Army Group Center was already half-strangled. The Soviet advance did not stop at the old front line. Soviet armored columns raced westward at extraordinary speed, crossing rivers, bypassing German strongpoints, advancing up to 50 kilometers per day. By late July, Soviet forces had crossed into Poland and reached the outskirts of Warsaw. In just 5 weeks, the Red Army had advanced over 500 kilometers. The road to Berlin was now open. Germany's eastern defenses had been torn apart from the Baltic to the Carpathians. The numbers tell the story of an unprecedented catastrophe. Army Group Center lost over 400,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured. 28 German generals were captured. 31 generals were killed in action. Over 2,000 tanks were destroyed. 3,000 aircraft were shot down. In terms of losses, Operation Bagration was the single greatest defeat in the entire history of the German army, far greater even than the catastrophe of Stalingrad. Germany never recovered from the blow of Operation Bagration. The reserves needed to rebuild Army Group Center did not exist. Every available division was already committed on other fronts. The Wehrmacht was forced to strip troops from Italy, from France and from Norway, weakening every front simultaneously. When the Western Allies landed in Normandy, Germany faced catastrophic pressure from east and west at once. The end of the Third Reich had become not just possible, but inevitable. Operation Bagration remains one of the most decisive military victories in the history of warfare. In 10 weeks, the Soviet Union destroyed an entire German army group, liberated Belarusia, and drove deep into Poland. The operation is little known in the West, overshadowed by the Normandy landings. But on the Eastern Front, where the fate of the war was truly decided, Bagration was the killing blow. Germany had no answer and no way back. The road to Berlin lay open,